Hello, you're listening to We Thought About Games, the podcast where games are looked at historically, fondly, and critically. I'm your host, Sid Menon, and tonight we'll be discussing Gundam Battle Assault 2, a one-on-one 2D fighting game developed by Natsume and published by Bandai for the PlayStation 1. Joining me on this episode is Curly Brace.
Hi.
And that's it for this episode, because after the incredibly long time it took to do Dragon's Dogma, I want to do something small, and I figured one-on-one game, one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, that works. That makes sense.
So, Curly, how did you get into Gundam Battle Assault 2?
So, how did I get into Gundam Battle Assault 2? I guess... So, I'd always, appreciated Mobile Suit Gundam from a distance. I always liked giant robot anime. But I didn't watch Gundam for a really, really long time. I think the first time I watched Mobile Suit Gundam was probably the end of 2015, the beginning of 2016. But I really like playing fighting games, and I'd seen Gundam Battle Assault 2 played on semi-famous Let's Play channel Game Grumps that one time. Do you remember that? In the distant, distant past, when that was a thing? I mean, it's still a thing, but it's definitely not a thing I watch anymore. But yeah, they did that, and it looked like a laugh. And then sort of circa 2016, when I was getting into Mobile Suit Gundam, I played Gundam Battle Assault 2, and you know what? It's really, really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? Well, what's your experience with this game?
So, I actually mentioned this on a friend's podcast where I watched Gundam 0080 for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Last year. Because the thing about being really into Gundam in the early 2000s was that it was hard to get access to the shows. Like, I had a 28.8K modem on my computer.
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah, even if there was episodes out there to download, which there really weren't, it would have taken ages. Like, I just couldn't watch that stuff if I wanted to.
Yeah.
No way at all. But the games did come out in America, and with Gundam Battle Assault 2, I think I just found it in a GameStop.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'd just go to those places and be like, what's in here? You know, I'd heard about it before in, like, a magazine or something. I think maybe one of my brother's friends had the first one. Yeah, I picked it up, and I was still super into Gundam at the time, so I was more willing to put in the time with it because we'd had other fighting games before, like at Marvel vs. Capcom on the Dreamcast, but...
Ooh, classic.
No, it's a really good game, but when I look at a move list, I'm like, so I have to do all these complicated controls to do a Shin Tatsumaki Senpu Kyaku? What is that?
Right,
like,
exactly.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what
yeah.
end result I'm going for. If I mash random buttons and they do a thing, I'll think, did I do it? Was that the move?
Yeah.
But with this one, I mean, not only are the special move inputs, like, really easy, but
right.
I knew what I was trying to go for, so I was more motivated to actually learn how to do it, and that's how I learned to play fighting games.
Exactly. Instead of making Ryu do the cool thing, you make the Gundam do the cool thing that you've seen it do on TV.
Yeah. And speaking of which, just a quick overview for anyone who's not really familiar with Gundam. It's an anime series started in the late 70s. Sort of the start of the quote-unquote real robot genre, where machines aren't, like, powered by magic or something. They're military machines made for war.
Right, yeah.
Still pretty fantastical abilities, all things considered, but it was grounded for the time. There are multiple different series in this. A bunch of them are set on the same timeline, with the technology getting more impressive or powerful over time, but there are also multiple spin-off shows. And this one really upfronts Gundam Wing and G Gundam, two completely different continuities with not even the same basic idea, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Gundam Wing has some realistic robots, but then the Gundams themselves in the shows are ridiculously strong, and G Gundam is a martial arts anime.
G Gundam is like Fist of the North Star, but they're giant robots. It's kind of amazing. And Wing Gundam is that, if you've ever seen a Gundam with giant, angel wings, that's Wing Gundam, shockingly enough.
There's a pretty long history of Gundam video games, and as licensed products, the miss rate is quite high.
Yeah, just a bit.
I won't deny that it's not.
Just going to say that while researching, as we're about to get onto, the history of this game, I found lists of Gundam games with, red or black links for just, games that were made and instantly forgotten about because they were just, complete non-entities as far as the canon of video games goes.
Yeah, it's a pretty strange thing. Like, one of my favorite Gundam games is a random Game Gear game. Unusual for any system, is the only Gundam game on that system. And I'm like, oh, it's one of the best ones. But it's not like Gundam fans are like, oh yeah, I remember SD Gundam Winner's History on the Game Gear.
Yeah, I bet not.
The creator himself, Yoshiyuki Toyono, is not a fan of Gundam being made in games because, yeah, I guess it is kind of antithetical to a show that's also supposed to show that war is bad. But also, the shows themselves have some pretty cool robots, so...
Yeah, this is the thing. This is like it's the conversation that comes up every time you try to discuss Gundam, and particularly the themes of Gundam, right? Is that, like, the show is about, oh, war is bad, but it's got the cool robot. And the thing is that it does got the cool robot, you know? You can't really get around that.
Mm-hmm. The model kits also make a shitload of money, so...
Well, yeah, exactly. That's it. Is that, like, it is inescapably a vehicle for selling merchandise. And, you know, that's not... I don't consider that to be some kind of inherently bad thing, but it is kind of inescapable when you're talking about, like, how the themes of this show are reflected by the reality of how people talk about it, you know?
Yeah. Alright, so, Curly, you want to move on to the history of the game itself?
So, the history of Gundam Battle Assault 2. Let's cast our minds back to the Super Famicom, to March 1996, where I believe it was Gundam Wing Endless Duel was released for the Super Famicom. That was the first Natsume Gundam game that I could find. And I believe that's a pun on Gundam Wing Endless Waltz, which was an OVA made after Gundam Wing.
It's kind of hard to say, because it doesn't have anything from Endless Waltz in it.
Oh, does it not? Okay, I didn't actually...
No, it's just the regular TV show.
Okay, I've never seen Endless Waltz, so I have no idea. Fair enough. Endless Duel it's the first of Natsume's like 2D fighter Gundam games. It's a Street Fighter-like 2D fighter. You know, you're locked on this 2D plane. The sprites are absolutely fantastic. It has that thing of mid-90s fighting games where the spriters working on them were just... They just had so much scope to do the really high-quality sprites that are sort of typical of that kind of game.
There was a G Gundam game on SNES that came out before that, I think. Maybe after, I can't quite recall, but it was pretty dreadful. Like, it looked okay, but it just played like crap, and it was really unfair. Endless Duel is it's on par with like Street Fighter Alpha, the SNES at least.
Yeah, like those games, like that game looks fantastic, and it's something that is carried through even through all of the rest of this sort of, you know, little splinter DNA of Gundam games. Like those sprites consistently look fantastic. And the other thing that it does is that, like, as a way of giving scale to Gundams, because obviously you've got this 2D fighter system, you know, in Street Fighter, it's very grounded. They're people, you know, they're people who are fighting. They may be able to shoot lasers from their hands, but they're still people. Whereas the way that Gundam tries to instill in you that you are still playing in giant robots, you have bigger lasers than you would in Street Fighter, but also you can fly. And the way that they do that is that you can just... Well, the screens are just massive. So, like, the default play screen will just be the height of a normal mobile suit. But you can press a button, you just fucking launch into the air, and then you're, like, 3 or 4 Gundam heights above the other Gundam, and then you can do that 2 more times. You can do that, in fact... Oh, wait, no, hang on. I've gotten ahead of myself. Endless Duel is just high jumps. Flying has not been invented yet. We'll get there. I promise we'll get there.
Some stuff can kind of fly.
Yeah.
I didn't really look up a move list for that game. I played it. I was very bad at it, but I liked it a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, Gundam Battle Master, July 1997. The big change from Endless Duel is that it de-emphasizes health bars, which, if you've played a game like Street Fighter, is an interesting idea, right? Instead of having a life meter that every time you take a hit, that's some of your life meter gone forever and you can never get it back. Instead, to more properly contextualize the idea of mobile suits, of machines, you have temperature bars, and when your suit sustains damage, you gain some temperature, and then once that caps out, your suit overheats, and it can only overheat a certain amount of times. So that's interesting, that's unusual. One thing that's really interesting about it is it means that if you can keep away, then you can recover literally any damage. As long as you don't hit your overheat limit, that's fine. You know, you can heal that damage.
Yeah, I imagine it can make rounds go on for a very, very long time.
Right, exactly. There is definitely scope for that.
Without a timeout.
Because at this point, Natsume have realized that their high-level sprite design team is an asset that they should work with, you can get battle damage and deformation to different hit zones on the different mobile suits. That's really cool. And it looks fantastic in action.
The machines are made of multiple, like, moving parts, but they don't just utilize, like, rotation, like a paper doll flash animation style, which I think would have looked real bad. Instead, they're still animated.
For sure, yeah. It helps to like give that sense of like moving machinery in a really cool way.
Mm-hmm.
It demonstrates a knowledge of the source material or like what they're working with in a really interesting way. I like it.
Yeah.
The other thing that is like feeds together with the idea of this temperature bar that you can always heal all of is that this is the game that introduces flight mechanics. They use their big screens, but now there's a universal flight button that you can just press and lift off into the air. And as far as I could gather, it's completely unmetered. It's an unbounded resource, so you can just do that. If you're low on health and you make your escape, rather than, for example, as you might in Street Fighter, a comparison I'm going to make a couple more times before we finish this podcast. If you get out of like a high pressure situation, instead of having to jump to the other side of your opponent and just run away to the other end of the stage, you can just fly off into the distance, and your opponent has to fly after you, which is maybe a kind of annoying play experience. But is very true to Gundam. That happens a lot in that show. Is that as soon as they escape from a high pressure scenario, they just fly away, and you know, that's annoying. But the other thing that it introduces I would say is an important part of Gundam Battle Assault 2's DNA is it has screen filling bosses, because Mobile Suit Gundam as a property has a whole bunch of giant robots that are even more giant than the giant robots. And those are in this game.
Yeah, these are often called mobile armors.
Mobile armors, yes. That's the words that I should have used, yes. I promise I do watch this show.
Battle Assault 2 doesn't use that term ever. I don't think any of the Battle Master games do, so don't worry about it.
I mean, not only is its grip on like official terms for the robots kind of loose, Battle Assault 2's grip on the English language is kind of loose. Like, it's not the best, but it does lead to some absolutely fantastic things that we're definitely going to mention when we get to them. But yeah, it's not the best in terms of English.
A classic fighting game through and through.
Exactly. So that was Battlemaster 1. Battlemaster 2 is released in Japan in 1998, and then is brought to the US as the first Battle Assault game in the year 2000. So this game is much more like Endless Duel. We sort of moved back again. They tried some interesting things with the cooldown system, the infinite flight system, and maybe kind of realized that not all of those things are great ideas. So now health bars are back. Flight is still here, but it's on a meter. Now you can, I think it's only do it for a certain amount of time, or you can only do it a certain number of times, like in Battle Assault 2. I actually can't remember which.
You have like a 3-section meter, and if you use the boost jump, it'll use up a section of the meter, so you can do 3 jumps. If you go into flight mode, it will drain the meter gradually.
Oh yeah, that's another thing, is that in its, grand innovation, the original Battlemaster, instead of having punch and kick buttons like a traditional fighting game, it has a punch button, a kick button, a shoot button, and a weapon button, which do various things all the way through the different casts. And I think that's quite an interesting thing. One of the things that Street Fighter did in a really interesting way, and was kind of it's maybe sort of distilled through playing other games. I guess you get it in games like King of Fighters and Fatal Fury, is that the buttons are all punches and kicks, but some characters don't really have access to punches and kicks. Mm-hmm. So when you press the kick button for a character who's a boxer, it's interesting to press that button and see what that does.
Yeah.
Whereas this shoot and weapon button, like every Gundam you get, you think, what's the shoot gonna be? What's the weapon gonna be? And that's cool.
Especially because, you shoot with a weapon, so you can't really use that as a reference.
It's like you're getting mixed up by the very design of the game. I like it. But unfortunately, because Battlemaster was too visionary for its time, or maybe any time, that system is gone. We're back on punch and kick buttons, but now our shoot and weapon systems are now Street Fighter-like motion inputs. So if you want your Gundam to fire its gun, you trace your stick in a quarter circle forward, and you press a punch button.
Yeah.
And also, we end up with more fighting game stuff. That's basically the sort of the thrust of the move from Battlemaster to Battlemaster 2, is that it becomes less like Gundam Battlemaster and more like a traditional fighting game. So in addition to motion inputs for special moves, we also get super moves, which are a really cool thing and are a really great way to like bring to life an action game. You know, you have like a cut in and then your character will yell something. You know, you take the focus of the action, and that's really cool to be able to do on demand.
Yeah.
And particularly things like G Gundam really lend themselves to this kind of thing, where, you know, characters are yelling and doing giant screen-filling laser beams and things like that. And supers are just a really obvious way to implement that.
Mm-hmm. And also weapons on these things that would be way too powerful to just let you do with a basic shoot or weapon input.
Right, exactly. It's sort of that fighting game ideology, I guess, that it's more satisfying to do something cool if there was a minor execution barrier to doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I wanted to emphasize slightly early, them changing it to Battle Assault for the US release was part of like a sort of marketing refocusing thing to make it more about Gundam Wing, which was extremely popular in the US at the time.
Yeah, thanks to a run on Cartoon Network's Toonami.
Right, exactly. And I think maybe Gundam Wing remains the most popular Gundam show in US markets, though I think that might be out of date by now, I'm not sure.
I don't think Wing is the most popular anymore. Its star has somewhat fallen since its big debut. I think there's a lot of people who are still nostalgic for it, but the newer shows have all picked up a lot more interest.
Yeah, sure.
I think Wing sells itself one way as being like very politically complex.
Right.
For people who were otherwise watching like Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon, it's like, wow, this is so complicated. What an interesting plot.
Yeah.
In retrospect, it is very much overcomplicated.
Yeah, it's also like, well, I mean, I say this as someone who's only like experienced it secondarily. I haven't actively sat down and watched it myself, but I gather it's quite melodramatic.
Yeah, and I think on rewatching some of it more recently, like, if you take it as, like, this very ridiculous drama that's not actually supposed to be grounded, it just works a million times better. In one of the early episodes, a character sees one of the Gundam pilots and says, "Is he a star prince?" Which they never remark on ever again in the show.
Nice.
But if you take it as the answer to that question being, yes, he is a star prince and so are the other Gundam pilots, it suddenly, like, feels much more tonally appropriate.
Makes a whole bunch of sense, yeah.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, a whole lot more sense? I don't know. Because, like, my like, if you were to ask me what I thought about Gundam Wing from, like, my own experience, it would be, is it the love interest from that show? Just yelling at the protagonist to come and kill her or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. I you know, that alone has made me quite interested in watching the show, but I'm committed to watching it in order, so
Yeah.
I'm still waist deep in Gundam Double Zeta at the moment, which, by the way, is great. So that's Battle Assault, or Battle Master 2. And then after that, because Battle Assault was apparently sufficiently popular in the US, and indeed Europe, Battle Assault 2 was released this time only in North America and Europe in 2002. So this is interesting because it's not a direct adaptation of a Japanese Battle Master release. It's a sequel to an adaptation of a Japanese Battle Master release. So that's interesting. You don't see that very often. Like, normally the attitude is we have a game pretty much finished that we can just change the words in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a lot of effort, but they can do it. But instead they thought, no, we'll iterate on this game, particularly for Western markets. And it doesn't come with a great deal of changes. There are some changes. So things like the dodge and guard system are changed. So, I actually can't remember in what way it changes.
If you do the dodge function where you tap two face buttons at once, you will do a dodge into the background really quick, and that uses up 1 gauge of your thrust.
Oh, that uses a boost stock. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I never did it.
It's a weird thing. It's a very weird defensive option because it's the kind of defensive option that people will be most familiar with it from Super Smash Brothers, right? But like in a fighting game like that, it's very weird to have that option, and it kind of when we talk about the mechanics in a minute, I'll talk about the way that plays into, you know, the various offensive options in that game, because it's interesting. It's unusual. It's weird to get used to. And like you say, there is definitely especially because like you do it by pressing 2 attack buttons. You dodge by pressing 2 attack buttons. You can easily just end up never doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The primary thing that it does, that Battle Assault 2 does, and the thing that upsets me the most about it, is that it removes the Zeta Gundam suits.
Yeah.
Which is deeply sad, because it's a great game. I think it's probably still the best Gundam game, for my money. But it means it doesn't have the Qbally from Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta Gundam in it, and that's a shame, because that's the best mobile suit. I'm sorry, that's just true.
Yeah, and it also would have meant that there were 2 female pilots in the cast instead of one who is a clone who's technically not gendered, I guess?
Yeah.
I don't know how it's handled in like newer translations of Double Zeta Gundam, but
Yeah, no, it's kind of awkward that that's the only woman in the cast, but that's what happens when, you do this with Gundam, which is that unfortunately that is how Gundam is for a real long time,
Yeah. There are also some exclusions with the cast that they did get that even if they wanted to have all like the big ticket Gundam, they could have at least included Alan B from G Gundam.
Yeah.
The design of her Gundam's also very like main character like, and I think would have been a better choice.
Yeah.
For like the quote unquote story mode in this game than the American guy Gundam.
Yeah. To be fair, the American guy Gundam is very funny. I did audibly laugh at that while I was playing this game earlier in advance of this recording, because it is. I mean, it's it's because that's how G Gundam is, but it's just so over the top in a way that is very funny to me.
Yeah. When it's something like American people, it's very funny. With some other groups, it's just racist.
Yeah. It is like that. That's the thing about G Gundam, isn't it? It is just racist, but like, it genuinely is very funny. Like the American Gundam is like a gunslinger. Is standard like projectile attack. He just like gets some revolvers out, starts shooting from the hip. It's very funny.
But he's also a boxer and a surfer.
You gotta tick all the boxes, So yeah, they remove the Zeta Gundam suits in order to make room for the G Gundam suits, which is G Gundam, also very popular in the US. But yeah, there are some Endless Waltz suits in as well. Epyon Gundam gets added to the boss cast, so it's cool because unlike in Battlemaster, you can play as them in this game, and it's very funny to do that. Because they're sort of balanced to be played with the other characters, but not really.
We'll talk about it when we get to the cast at large, but this game is not entirely interested in the idea of balance.
No, and in many ways I respect that, because I feel like, anime as it exists, a large portion of anime as it exists, rather, is definitely like, not antithetical to, but it doesn't match well with the idea of balanced single combat, When you win in an anime, you win by degrees, You obliterate your opponent, and then they befriend you.
Yeah, since this isn't really like a high-level fighting game for people who are just really good at the genre, I don't think it quite has that level of depth, but for someone like me who's like interested in being good at fighting games, but very bad at it,
yeah,
it still allows for that level of like, oh, I beat you using that in something that is like objectively worse. Not like tier lists that change or anything over time. Like, it's just worse. There's no arguing.
Yeah. When your opponent picks the big Zam and you pick the ball, like, that is a David and Goliath situation.
Everything's a David and Goliath situation if you're playing as the ball. Unless you're fighting another ball.
And fighting another ball as the ball is very funny. But yeah, and don't worry, we'll get to the ball. We have a lot of loving things to say about the ball, I'm sure. I guess another interesting thing about Battle Assault 2 is that it was later chopped up into budget Wing Gundam and G Gundam fighting games for the Simple series, which I didn't know about before I read that Wikipedia page.
Yeah, Simple series in Japan is a series of budget games. Most famously, I guess, the origin of Earth Defense Force.
Really? That's very interesting.
Started as a budget game where like they either try to emulate a more popular game, just way cheaper, or they just have some really wild idea that they just throw the minimum amount of money into to make possible. So there's Defense Force. It's like, hey, what if there was an alien invasion game where you shot machine guns at like 50 giant ants on screen? Can the PS2 handle it? It can't. Who cares?
Let's do it anyway. Yeah. That's one of the things I love the most about Earth Defense Force. You're right, it seems to have been founded on that dream. And they've just been gradually realizing it over time. And now it's just very much, yeah, we can fit fucking 800 ants on the screen, but they look like shit, but you can stamp on them, and it's great. Like,
But in this case, it's also a place where you can, say, cut the wing characters from a full-fledged fighting game and put them in a game. Say, oh, it's a Gundam wing fighting game. And cut the same thing for the G Gundam cast and sell it for, I hope, below half price, because that sucks.
That is definitely below half of the cost of the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
A weird thing about this game that I forgot to mention when I was talking about it. So the Zeta Gundam suits have been removed from the game to make room for the G Gundam suits and the Endless Waltz suits. The Zeta Gundam suits are still in the game. You know, their files are accessible if you have Cheat Engine or whatever. You can, you know, get them out and walk them around the screen and do their moves and stuff. But like things like their voice lines and pilot art is not there, which is interesting and strange to me.
Kind of a shame, just like since they're pretty much done, to not have them in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess you can make the argument that like Wing Gundam is such a copy of Zeta Gundam anyway.
Yeah.
There's a suit that's kind of like the Cubile, but I mean, if you have a Game Shark, the codes are out there, or on an emulator. First we should, I mean, we're talking about mechanics here and there, but let's get into it.
Well, the first thing you've got on this list definitely feels to me like the most important thing about Gundam Battle Assault 2, and it's the general feel of the game and the weight of how everything feels to play. Like, you know, what would you say about that?
I mean, even though they've moved back to fighting game inputs for this, and, you know, special moves and all that, there's like a heaviness to the characters. It's this responsive. I wouldn't say it's unresponsive, but it feels like there are restrictions that make it feel more like you're using a big machine and not a person.
So, like, I think you're right when you say it's like it doesn't feel unresponsive, because it feels like the game is responding to you. It just feels like that takes a long time to do, and that's conveyed in, you know, from the way that the walking animations play out to the way that just, you know, even like swinging your sword just has ridiculously hefty startup animation, but you feel that weight when it connects, and that's really good.
Yeah, it's got very satisfying hit sound effects.
Yeah, totally.
Animation tied to it. An unusual recommendation I'd make for this game that I wouldn't make for others is to maybe turn the sound effects down a little bit when you play, because I think the music is quite good.
The music is good.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I mean, true to a game where giant robots fight, you'll be hearing the sounds of bullets, lasers, punching impacts and metal impacts and stuff constantly. Also, the announcer calls out some special moves. Some characters call out their own special moves. You won't be able to hear the music at all.
That's a really weird thing. Is that the announcer, what felt like a majority of the characters, the announcer calls their moves for them, which means that in a match between two of those characters, you're both doing things at each other, and the announcer is doing double duty, just yelling, "Oh, get him, get him!" Which I think is hilarious.
Cracker grenade.
Yeah, exactly. That feels like the spiritual precursor to the Street Fighter 4 announcer, who's definitely one of the most extra announcers ever to have lived. But yeah, it's very funny. It's very funny.
Also, there's the health system for this game. A little more standard, but it's still unusual, I think, for most fighting games, is that you have 3 gauges. Some bosses have more. When you run out of a gauge, you will be knocked down, and I think it's a holdover from the temperature gauge, the announcer will say overheating. What's interesting about this is a couple things. One is that individual strong hits will only knock them down to the end of a health gauge, and it won't chip into the next one. So if you use like the Gundam hammer on something with less than like half its life bar, it's kind of a waste, because you won't even get to do most of the damage of it. But also it means that because you take chip damage if you block, if you have an attack that does multiple hits, it pays to actually do it at someone who is blocking, because they'll be knocked out of the block.
That was another thing I found out to my great dismay, is that you can die from chip damage. I thought I was really smart, just trading attacks with the big Zam, just like blocking, punishing, blocking, but nope, just dead. When you were talking about like the responsiveness of the thing and how everything feels heavy and it feels like it has weight, the thing that it reminds me of a lot. Have you ever played any Samurai Showdown games?
Yes, I have.
It reminds me of that a lot. There's much less of an emphasis on getting a small hit and then converting that into a big hit like there is in a game like Street Fighter or an anime game. And it's much more about being able to read what your opponent is going to do and preemptively make a big slow hit into them in the way that hefty combat is, and that is really satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, damage is fairly high in this game.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Like, that's before you even include the boss characters who have ridiculous attacks. Because that's the thing, when your attacks are really slow, if they're slow to start up and they're slow to recover. So if you do one at the wrong time, and your opponent is standing there with their super meter, they can just go, great, and hit you for most of, if not all of your health bar. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, speaking of supers and things, so there's also unified inputs for the specials, which we mentioned earlier. It must have been in the original Battle Assault as well, right, where almost all of the units have, in addition to their health meter, their boost meter, they also have a bullet meter, right?
Yep.
It's like a universal special input, except for one or two characters. You can do a forward quarter circle and press a punch button, and you'll get like a bullet type thing. Sometimes it's a Vulcan shot, sometimes it's a laser gun, sometimes it's unique to the suit. And that's unusual, is that there's this like bullet resource for everyone. It's like a universal resource that everyone uses in a different way. But once it's out, it's out.
Yeah, you get like, I think it's 500 ammo units.
I think it actually varies from suit to suit.
I know they use different amounts.
Yeah.
We should mention the button layout for this game. Like we said, this punches and kicks is light punch, light kick, heavy kick, and then R1 is your booster button. So with the universal projectile attack, quarter circle forward, light punch will do just one shot or a small amount of bullets, and heavy punch will do 3 shots, usually out of your main weapon, or an even bigger barrage of bullets. And if you do this attack when you don't have enough ammo, your character will still do the animation.
So yeah, that's another thing, is that there's a sort of semi-universal theme of when you do a special input and you press the light button, you get a light version of that special, and if you press the heavy button, you get a heavy version of that special. It's not for every special, but quite a few specials have this feature.
And there are still unique moves for the suits, but even then, if they don't all have the same exact inputs for all the moves, they all have the same input style. It's not like Street Fighter where some characters you want to charge a certain input or anything like that. This uses more circles than this one. No, it's the same for everyone. It's just which combinations they have produce moves.
That's it. Like, if you know, barring one or two specific exceptions, if you know how to do all of the moves for one character, you know how to do all of the moves for every character, pretty much.
Yeah, and this made it much easier for me to get into it.
Yeah, exactly.
After I did enough moves, I stopped looking at the manual when I got a new suit, and I just went into versus mode and tried it out.
And that experience of feeling as though you know the language that the game is written in, like, that's really satisfying, is to be able to just pick up any character and say, right, what does this character do? That doesn't do anything, that doesn't do anything. Oh, this does something cool. This does something cool. It's a sensation that you build up, I guess, over a long time playing lots of fighting games. Realize there are, there's a very specific subset of different motions that can do things. But in a game like this, they make it a very small set of motions that can do things. It's very satisfying, It's good.
I mean, there's a cast of 30 mobile suits in this game, and it is, meant to appeal to just people who want more Gundam stuff, so making it a high-level execution game probably wouldn't have been in their best interest.
Yeah, I think it's a great choice. Like, in fact, I would go so far as to say that as fighting games for people who don't play fighting games, as useless as that phrase is, I would say that Gundam Battle Assault 2 is a really, really good one. If you like giant robots and you appreciate fighting games, but you don't feel as though you can play a more complicated one, this is a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this got me to play other fighting games more knowledgeably. Maybe the phrase you could use is, it's a fighting game for people who don't think they like fighting games.
I like this. I like this phrase because it gently implies that everyone likes fighting games, really. You just haven't played the right one yet. That does sound like something I would say. So yeah, I'm in. I like it.
We mentioned the thrust system during the history. Interesting in that I think that if you had these big super bosses in a game with a different thrust system, they would just completely fall apart. They're already, from the get-go, kind of unfair anyway.
Yeah.
But without this, they would be completely unfair.
We'll get to it early in the list of suit descriptions, but playing against Big Zam has a very specific pattern, and it is not particularly fun.
Yeah, but the ability to boost jump over these big enemies is a very different choice from trying to go under them or stay close or something.
And I really like the way that having a thrust system and a hovering system means that you get to choose between speed in your thrust and control, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had quite a lot of fights with the AI where I'll boost out of a bad situation, or they'll boost out of a bad situation, and the other will just follow them up, and they'll just, but like, because we've got such poor control over our movement, we just kind of bump into each other in the air. And I think that's very funny. I like that.
Yeah. Also, we should mention this game has like a different levels of zoom. The sprites are quite big, so the thrust only works with this because the camera will zoom out.
So yeah, if you go off screen, the screen generally will zoom out to accommodate you. Yeah, or indeed, if one of you is just massive, the screen will zoom out to accommodate you.
In single player, it will just focus on your character, which I kind of wish it didn't, because that can mean you'll lose track of the enemy sometimes.
Yeah, and especially because like there are some games where the camera focusing on characters in particular places is used like tactically. Like it gets used in Marvel games quite a lot. If you go really high up in the air, your opponent completely loses track of where they are, and you can mix them up with that. But the computer is never going to fall for that because that's just not how the computer works.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, so there's also a universal unblockable attack, and I think that is a really cool thing. Because, so we talked briefly before about the dodge, like the spot dodge and guard system, where if you press two face buttons, you either dodge into the background, which, is definitely cheating in a 2D fighter, or if you're too big to dodge out of the way, you can do a big shield guard. And I think that's a really interesting thing to mix together with these unblockable melee attacks, because when everything is so slow, it's quite tempting to just block a lot, like all the time, because in a standard fighting game, if someone is right up close to you and pressing a lot of buttons, they can mix up between hitting your block and hitting you quite low, quicker than it's possible for you to react to, right? And they can like jump over you and do the same thing. But in Gundam, because everything starts up so slowly, and like a lot of the lows in this game are like very long slides that you get a lot of time to respond to, there is that temptation to just block a lot. So everyone having a very slow but completely unblockable attack is a really cool idea, because it means that you can't just hide, holding down back in the corner. And it also, because you can't block it cleverly, means that you have to fly up and over it. I think that's really cool. It takes a standard negative fighting gameplay loop. It makes it encourage players to use this new system they've designed. I think that's really, really clever.
Yeah, I didn't actually, for most of my time playing this game back when I first played it, I didn't do the unblockable attack, mostly because a half circle back was too complicated for me at first.
Yeah.
When I didn't realize that fighting game inputs are actually not that scary.
They're also super slow. If you don't see a situation where they seem super useful, then I can totally see why you wouldn't use them, because a lot of them, your character will get, it's usually a beam saber or something. Your character will put their hand in their pocket, pull out their beam saber, draw their beam saber, do a slash, sheath their beam saber, put it back in their pocket. And it takes a full second to do.
Yeah. And also the announcer will call it out by saying, "You can't defend."
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But yeah, I think it's a really cool system, and even if it doesn't get used much, it's got quite a heavy influence on how the game feels to me, personally.
Yeah, because this game rewards aggression fairly well, especially against the computer. The computer knows how to deal with keep away very well.
Yes, it does.
Having these in there is not just an important shift in the dynamic for you, but also when you fight the computer, that you have to be aware that, I want to be in close so I can keep the pressure on. But if I have any delay, that can be when they do this move.
Yeah, exactly. So we mentioned it briefly before, but there are super moves in this game, and they're very cool. You do a forward quarter circle, and you press two buttons at the same time. For some reason, everyone has one except... Does the ball have one?
The ball doesn't, and neither does New Gundam.
Gundam.
Very strange, considering how unbelievably strong that is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why, I guess. But it seems weird that they would decline to give New Gundam a super when they gave one to every boss character.
Yeah, and you get 3 of these. You can use them whenever you want.
Yeah, so I guess this is a good time to make this point. Each player starts the game with 3 super stocks, and can use them literally as soon as they can pull off that quarter circle. So the thing is, I guess, that in the vast majority of cases, not every case, you can block them and they won't do much damage. But it's very weird that this, coupled with the ammo meter for your basic projectile attack, it means that this game has no resources that you build over the course of play, like the EX meter in Street Fighter 2 Turbo. You start with resources that you eventually lose. And that is very unusual for a fighting game, but it is actually a fairly strong theme, at least in the early Gundam shows. The idea that they run out of stuff, and they have to either wait to be resupplied of it or make do without it, comes up quite a lot in Mobile Suit Gundam and Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. I think it's interesting that they carried that over.
Even in Gundam Wing, the Wing Gundam, the initial version of it in the show, its main gun is ridiculously powerful. It's like when you do the super move in this one, it fires that huge beam. Even in the show, it's noted as only having, I think, 3 shots.
Yeah, I guess it's like a way to give jeopardy to the individual episodes, because the thing is that the Gundam will get, scratched up and beaten up and bits of it will break, and they'll say, oh, we can't fix that, you'll need to make do without it. But then between that episode and the next episode, it will just get fixed and that's all fine. So, it's a way of carrying that over, I guess, that idea that you need to, in this specific window of time, you need to make do with what you have, but whatever, it'll be fine later. But there's a specific time at which it will be fine, and you have to make do until then,
Yeah, and it works in this format because there's no multiple rounds in a fight. You have the enemy's armor gauge as a gauge of, how screwed you are that you've run out of resources.
That's an interesting thing, actually, because when you build your EX or super meter over the course of a game, if you waste a super or something, there is the idea that you might be able to get another one, right? Whereas in this game, you start with loads of supers, but if you waste them, they're gone. And that's it. So it becomes about finding the most opportune moment to use them, and that's really interesting, because if you die having not used all of them, that's a resource that you've wasted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very unusual tension. Quite a lot of the games I've played, it was confusing to me when I should properly be using my supers. It was figuring out, what kinds of attacks they would punish, or whether I could fit them into combos and things.
Yeah, it also means you can, unlike most fighting games, engage the very unique opening gambit of, as soon as the announcer says fight, doing your super move.
Right, exactly. Because if your opponent tried to do something, or maybe just did their super slightly slower than you, you might clip them.
And you can be knocked out of these too. So
right.
I remember one specific instance when I was fighting against the computer, and it's one of those times when it was way smarter. It just looked a lot smarter doing this than I think it actually is.
Right.
I think I was using the Toggies 3. The special is a big forward-facing beam. I engaged mine. I was up against the Wing Zero, and the Wing Zero engaged its super, where it leaps in the air and fires diagonally downwards. So it leapt over mine and shot me with its special.
Damn. Stole a super and a bunch of life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it killed me. Also, my brother was watching me play, so he saw that happen.
Oh, no. It didn't just kill you, it killed your soul, too. So, this is another thing I couldn't figure out, is that when I was playing through Street Mode, which we'll get onto, before recording this, I was playing as the Burning Gundam, and every time I did my super, there was a big cut-in, and the pilot would, yell something, a picture of him came up on the screen, he would yell something, and it would be like that for 3 full seconds before he did the big Kamehameha.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it didn't happen again. So does that only happen in Street Mode?
Yeah, Street Mode, the characters have cut-ins for their super moves. In other ones, it's just the announcer shouts, destroy him, and you'll do it.
Yeah. And that's presumably why only so many characters are available for Street Mode.
Yeah, it's weird the choices they made, because there are some characters in this who are voiced because they have a quick dialogue scene with a character. There's one character in this game that's voiced that has not been voiced ever anywhere else in any Gundam media. And he has, one line of dialogue in Street Mode.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and then other characters show up, Akahana has a dub voice. No dialogue. Saiji, yep, nothing.
That's so weird.
They did call back the anime voice actors, I think, for the most part. I think Hiro's voice is different. But everyone else, I'm pretty sure, is exactly the same, and yet they just didn't call back all of them, I guess. Also, you might notice when you're playing that Amuro and Catra sound very similar. That's because they're both voiced by Brad Swale.
The other thing I wanted to say about Supers before we move on, it's really, really impressive in terms of technically standardized character movesets expressing a lot of personality about the characters. This is something that is really good about, it's one of the things that Street Fighter tried with a lot, and then contemporarily Super Smash Bros. Is really good for, is that, like, a technically standardized set of moves expresses a lot about a character. Like, it's the way that a character interprets punch, right?
Yeah.
And Supers in this game are really, really good for that, because, like, quite a lot of the characters do just fire big, big, big laser beams, but a lot of them do substantially more esoteric stuff, and I think that's really clever and cool.
Yeah, I think Dragon Gundams is definitely the weirdest one out of them all.
Yeah, Dragon Gundams is very weird. And because I hadn't seen G Gundam, Bolt Gundam's Super, I feel like that's definitely a Geese Howard reference, right? Because when he did it in game, I was like, wow, that's definitely Geese Howard's Raging Storm.
Yeah, it is very similar.
I checked the dates to see if they lined up, and I think they kind of do. G Gundam is that thing where it came around at a vaguely similar time to Street Fighter, so it's difficult to say whether it's being inspired by Street Fighter or just the things that Street Fighter was inspired by. Inspiration from Street Fighter and fighting games is something I'm always on the lookout for as a boring person who only thinks about things through one lens. So the one thing that I noticed, because I played this a bunch in 2016, one thing that I noticed this time that I didn't then is that this game has a universal throw mechanic, which had completely passed me by when I last played it. It works in the same way as throwing does in games like, Street Fighter 2 and Guilty Gear, where you run up to your opponent and you press forward and heavy punch when you're very close to them, and you throw them. Initially, I didn't even know what was happening, because unlike other games where you get this, this unblockable attack where you throw your opponent away from you, in Gundam Battle Assault 2, when you throw your opponent, you just push them back and it stuns them.
Yeah.
And that's really weird.
And it's blockable.
Is it blockable? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I have no way of knowing if my AI opponent is blocking me or not, so That's interesting. But that's, I guess, the thing about it, is that even though it's blockable, because the unblockable attacks in this game are very, very slow, even though it's blockable, it's really fast. It's definitely the fastest move that you have. And it's wild, because unlike these games where throws just do a set amount of damage and move your opponent away from you, maybe give you an avenue to renew your pressure on them, mix them up or something, this just lets you have a full combo for free. So if you have a combo that starts off like a relatively fast attack, if you get a throw on someone, congratulations, you've hit it. It's very strange. It's very, very strange.
There are a few occasions I've noticed where I would get the stun on someone, and I would accidentally mess up my special move input, and they'd already be on stun. It's only fast enough that you need to actually execute your follow-up correctly, or you won't get it.
It's very brief. It's just very strange to me that they included that, because the other thing that I noticed about this game, and I guess I should probably talk about it now because we've gone through the rest of the mechanic stuff. We were talking before about the way that this game feels, the way that the movement has a lot of weight. Part of that is conveyed by the fact that you can walk back and forward like in a normal fighting game. You can also dash and run as these suits, and when you stop running, your momentum carries you forward quite a lot.
Yes.
This has really, really peculiar implications for combos, because if you run your opponent into the corner and start jabbing them, then because you've still got all of this forward momentum, you're not pushed out by the recovery on the move in the way that you would if you were just standing there. So I was able to, with the suits with faster jabs, I was able to link 8 or 9 jabs in the same combo before my opponent got the chance to block. Then I went online and I saw what other people had done with the combo system in this game. It turns out that with some suits, you can dash in, jab them a bunch of times, super them, while they're recovering from the super, dash in again, and jab them a bunch of times again, for as long as you have super stocks.
Yep.
That's very funny to me.
Yes, there are a couple of bosses in this game where it recommends this endless rush down loop if you want to beat street mode. And yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
speaking of Street Mode, I figure it's a good time to get into the discussion of the various modes in this game.
So instead of arcade mode, we have street mode, which is very weird because, as far as I could gather, there were no streets featured. I just played as Domon and did some punch. Actually, I had a very, very strange experience with Domon's story, because his story is that he has a picture of... I eventually learned, I think it was his brother?
Yeah.
And his story is, have you seen this person? You'll need to fight me. Okay. They fight, sorry I haven't seen this person. Like 8 times. Including people who are dead by the time... I mean, I guess they don't even exist in the same universe, right?
Yeah, when he fights Gato from Gundam 0083, which is a completely different continuity, so... Have you seen this person? Probably not. I highly doubt he has, considering he's from a different reality.
Yeah, he also fights the Big Zam.
He doesn't even ask that guy.
Yeah, exactly. They just fight. It's very strange. As someone who, doesn't know anything functional about G Gundam, I was kind of hoping I might learn something about it, and I didn't really learn much more than I already knew.
Oh yeah, this dialogue is astoundingly uninstructive as to anything happening in Gundam at all.
It doesn't, use the space for, flavor or to enrich the narrative in any way. It's just very, very pedestrian. Do you have what I need to advance the story? No. Okay. I'll talk to the next person.
They got the voice actors back, but maybe just because they were so very tired and probably not paid quite as much, recording 5 lines of dialogue in the studio and that's it.
Yeah.
The deliveries are bad.
Yeah, the delivery's real bad. And I guess this is a good time to talk about the delivery, in the rest of the game. The thing that stuck out to me was the announcer for the game. So not the battle announcer, who I think is great and is doing a fantastic job, and I support them in everything they do, is the menu announcer. Sounds very strange. They sound like they've had sort of already quite unwieldy lines written for them, and then they're reading them in a very, very strange voice. They throw them at you so often, every time you mouse over an option, the announcer will read it to you. Every time you mouse over a Gundam on the character select screen, the announcer will read its name to you. And it becomes funny so quickly.
Yeah, especially if you don't know what she's saying, in some cases, I don't think you'd be able to tell what she's saying.
Exactly.
It seems like their method for making her sound like a computer voice was a method that also makes her sound like she's underwater.
Yeah, so not only does she sound like she's underwater, but she says these names with a completely nonsensical cadence. No one who was ever saying those names would say them with that rhythm, and because it says it in the same rhythm every single time, it's really, really, really funny.
Wing Gundam, 0 custom.
I don't get it at all. It's all that silly. If you went through the whole list, I think you would be in stitches by the end, because it just sounds so silly. Imagine then, after an hour of messing around with the versus mode, listening to all these names and just having a great old laugh to myself. I finished street mode, the credits rolled, I finished street mode, I saved my game, and then after the save comes up, it tells you unlocked this Gundam. And then in the really weird announcer voice, with, again, that sounds like, an alien speaking, who's just had so weird is the grip on the English language, says the phrase, "You better go fight some more." But in a completely ridiculous rhythm. It's really funny. Really, really funny.
Yeah, machine learning how to be alluring.
God, it was so funny. So funny.
If it had a face, it would be doing eyebrows at you,
And that was it. It was because the only experience I'd had with it so far was it failing to sound convincingly like a person when saying Gundam names. So that this was written so conversationally made me really, really laugh.
So at Street Mode, you have a limited selection of characters, the ones they wanted voices for. You play through 8 predetermined fights. I think they roughly want to capture the arc of whatever the character did in their show, but they don't have all the units they fought against. So sometimes you will fight something from a completely different reality, and also in a lot of these fights, they're not very fair to you.
Yeah, not the most. I'd sort of alluded to this earlier, but I think it's the penultimate stage of penultimate, maybe the one before that. As Domon, is you fight the Big Zam, and the Big Zam is, for anyone who hasn't seen Mobile Suit Gundam, too tall for the screen. The thing about the Big Zam that is really, really funny is that its legs have hitboxes as it walks forward. It walking forward will damage you, and if you don't really have a strong grip on the systems, this is a very, very annoying experience because there doesn't seem to be any possible way to beat it. But what is weird about it, because it's a fighting game AI, it's made to be sort of vaguely playable against. Like if it could play perfectly, you'd never win. If you fly over it and land behind it, it just doesn't turn around. It doesn't turn around automatically like most fighting game characters do when jumped over. While you're on the wrong side of it, its options are to use its homing missiles, which consume its ammo meter, and back kick, and also do the ground pound.
Yeah, which is very slow.
Yeah, it's very slow. So that's the idea, is that you get on the other side of it, you just pressure it and dodge its very slow attacks, and then hope it doesn't jump back over you, which it can do, because eventually one of those models will just say, no, I can't be in this corner any longer with a giant thing above me, and either it will slide over the top of you, or you'll slide out from underneath it. Both can happen.
Though, being out in front of it, yeah, you can get far away from it, and that'll give you enough time to dodge its missiles. You still are at risk of it doing its super move, which is a giant beam that will do a crapload chip damage even if you block.
Getting even chipped by its giant laser beam is the worst, and if you get hit by it, that's probably a whole health bar gone. And as Sid mentioned earlier, the bosses will sometimes have, I think it's 4, but it could be 5 health bars. It's weird to fight against because it's one of the most blatantly asymmetrical encounters that you can have in that game. And in fighting games they're so heavily predicated on being a symmetrical fight, it's weird not only that they included this boss in the first place, but also that you can play as that boss in the versus mode.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you can just have 2 of them, just get right up and start kissing each other with laser beams.
It highlights something very unexpected for this game, especially as a change I think they did make from Battle Assault 1 to Battle Assault 2. I was surprised, in retrospect, how playing as the original Gundam, the RX-78, against Big Zam, was not significantly more difficult than fighting it with Burning Gundam from G Gundam.
Yeah, so this is something I guess that we'll talk about a bit more because it's the first mobile suit on our list, but the RX-78 original Gundam feels very, very strong, as a unit. I played around with it quite a bit because I like that suit design a lot, and it has a lot of options and very strong attacks.
Yeah, originally it didn't quite have those options in previous games. Even though it's the big iconic suit, it was kind of bad. Also, you can unlock a few more characters for Street Mode. You'll first unlock them just for that mode. Then you beat their Street Mode and you'll unlock them for Versus Mode. There's 1, maybe 2 mobile suits you unlock by beating every Street Mode on Hard. So if you don't want to keep replaying Street Mode, I don't think it changes numbers, but it just makes the AI more aggressive.
It's a perpetually weird thing playing fighting games against an AI, but the only thing that difficulty does to a fighting game AI, because of the way that it exists inside the game, always knows exactly what you're doing at any given time. Definitionally, then, it knows what the correct answer is. So if you do a low-hitting attack from all the way across the screen at an AI, they can block it, they just choose not to. If they were, not recovering from a move, if they could block it, they always know that they could have done that, right? So a difficult fighting game AI will just intentionally get hit less often. Playing fighting games against hard AIs is a strange experience.
It's rough, but playing it on normal, I felt like I was up against the ropes a few times. I still think that it felt fair, but I felt also that it could become way less fair soon.
Right, exactly. With my, non-existent knowledge of how this game actually works, ran into 1, maybe 2 fights in Street Mode on normal where, I felt like my alternating of mid and low attacks was not getting me anywhere. My opponent was just effortlessly blocking everything, and I thought, I don't really know how to play this game. But then my opponent did, anything that didn't hit me, and I was like, great, super time. So the game gives you the tools, at least, You have a lot of options at any given time.
Yeah, I picked it up just 1 time before this recording, and Domon's 7th out of his 8th fights against Master Gundam, I got hit maybe twice, and I just completely annihilated that guy.
Yeah, I found Master Gundam very easy, actually, yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like hard mode, even if it's a lot of added pressure, is probably more balanced towards being comfortable with how the system works.
Right, yeah, exactly. There are also time attack and survival modes. I didn't actually experiment with any of those. Or maybe I had a quick look at survival mode and it was just well, it was what you'd expect. It was a survival mode. Your health carries over between matches and you just have to keep going.
So, time attack mode, there's two different versions, A and B. A, you fight 8 random regular mobile suits. Not bosses, it's just a random selection. Time attack mode B, you fight the 4 giant bosses in this game. And you might think, I don't recall fighting a 4th giant boss. That's because the last one is Psycho Gundam Mark III, which is original to this game.
I see, this is an interesting thing. I think I read that it was original to a Game Boy Advance game? And that was the only other thing that it's been in. But it is original to Gundam video games, crucially. It would probably be weirder if they chose to include something that they invented for another video game, but what advantages does it have over the Psycho Gundam Mark II? Like,
it appears to have more guns on it.
If you can imagine such a thing. And I guess we'll get onto that when we actually talk about it actively. But yeah, it's a weird choice, a weird inclusion.
And survival mode, you do recover your current armor gauge for beating a fight. So if you get knocked down one, you'll never get it back. And you get 1 unit of Mega Special back per win.
The weird thing about this is that you can still play it as the boss suits.
Mm-hmm.
So those things, not only do they have a whole bunch of health bars, they also lose them very, very slowly and have like vastly more powerful attacks than the standard suits that you're going to be up against. So like, you just plow through them.
Yep.
I got up to like 7 or 8 wins as the Psycho Gundam Mark III without really thinking about it. It just kind of happened, and I thought this isn't very engaging, so I stopped. But you know, it would be an interesting challenge because you have to get 20 wins to unlock the unlockable from doing survival mode.
Yeah. 20 wins you unlock the Neue Ziel from Gundam 0083. And survival mode is also not affected by your difficulty selection. It's just how far in you are.
Do you know if the time attack, so it picks your 8 regular suits and picks them at random, can it pick the crap ones? Can it pick the ball?
Yeah, I fought a ball.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that they tie an unlock to beating it under a certain amount of time when your run could be vastly different.
Exactly, yeah.
Because the Epion's technically not a boss enemy because it's not like a giant boss. So you could fight that and just get completely annihilated.
Yeah, Epion is very, very, very powerful.
Right, and that's all the modes, and did the big mechanics overview, so now it's just talk about the cast.
All those juicy, juicy robots that you've all been waiting to hear. Which is the best and worst Gundam?
But let's start with the RX-78-2 original Gundam, piloted by Amuro Ray.
There it is. It's a great suit, and it's a lot of fun to play. I think Gundam Versus did this quite well as well, more recently than this game. But it made the classic old suit still a lot of fun to play. It still feels fresh mechanically, and I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's got like a decent amount of utility and focus on strong hits instead of like really flashy combos. So it kind of encompasses the idea of it being like an older fashioned style of fighting without it being older fashioned, therefore garbage because it's technology that's old.
It's got like a bunch of specials. The first suit I tried was Sazabi, and Sazabi has like 4 specials, whereas the original Gundam has like 7 or 8. Like this suit can do a lot of things.
Yeah, and some inputs even produce a different move if you do them in midair.
Yeah. Like it has more than one unblockable attack, right? It can do a grounded unblockable attack with a beam saber, and then an aerial one with a javelin.
And it also has another unblockable saber attack it can do with an even easier input. This is part of the reason I didn't learn the full saber input, because I think it's just like down back punch. The Gundam will leap in the air and do like a downwards plunging stab with the beam saber, and it's unblockable like the regular saber attacks, and it's way faster.
Yep, it's pretty good. one of those moves that would definitely, if you played this game as a kid, would definitely have really annoyed you when your friend just kept using it, because counterplay is not obvious, and it's very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you just lunge forward and saber them into the ground, and yeah, it's pretty good.
Its mega special, like we mentioned earlier, is the Gundam Hammer, which is the highest damaging single hit in the game, but it also has the most specific targeting.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, the most highest damage single hit, because there are loads of there are supers in this game that do like 60 hits. Yeah, yeah, it's really strong. But yeah, it hits a specific small location, some distance away, and it's quite weird. And it's quite a long startup, I guess.
I got some good use out of bosses, but also the fact that it's hard to aim makes it very satisfying when you finish an enemy with it, because it's just such a hard hit.
And it's a really good animation as well. Like it's a real like whip motion. It really like slams down in a very satisfying way.
Yeah. Then we move on to the Zaku 2, piloted by Denim, the second person ever to die on screen in Gundam. And the villains, I guess, but yeah.
So yeah, this suit is really cool. It's slightly tragic for reasons we're about to get onto, but it's what you want from the video game rendition of a Zaku, right?
Yeah.
It's fast, it charges, it's cheap and cheerful. It's cool. And its grenade like projectile attack is
Cracker grenade.
Yeah. That's a really fun tool to use, because you naturally your plan as the Zaku is to get your opponent right up into the corner and start hassling them, and the cracker grenade makes that really easy, because then you throw that in front of them, and then that's an avenue of escape that's cut off to them.
Yeah. The Mega Special throws out a flurry of 3 flurries of 3 cracker grenades. They move kind of slow, and they detonate after a set point, but they can blow up before that.
Yeah, they are proximity as well.
Yeah. Because it's 9 grenades, it's actually fairly good against bosses.
Yeah.
But also, you can make it an easy trap for an enemy to move into.
Yeah, it's a cool Zaku. I like it. And oh yeah, its gun is fairly powerful as well. That's something that surprised me about it.
Yeah, because we didn't mention the original Gundam. It has the head-mounted like small machine guns, which is actually not an ammo-using move.
No, it isn't. It's sort of a weird half special. It's like one of the only special inputs in the game, maybe the only special input in the game that isn't like a full motion. You just tap backwards and then forwards and then press a punch.
But its regular shooting attack is it fires its beam rifle, so it either fires 1 shot, or with the heavy input it fires 3 individual shots. Whereas the Zaku has a machine gun, so you always get multiple hits either way.
So when I said that the Zaku was tragic, it's because it's a great, well-designed unit that's fun to play. But unfortunately, Char's Zaku is the Zaku, not only red, but that's very important that it's red, it's also way faster. It's like massively, massively faster. Not only is it massively faster, but its cracker grenades are just loads better. They go much further and last longer before exploding. It's upsetting. Poor Denim. Like, come on, Char. That's the worst thing, is that Char is in this game 2 other times. They couldn't let Denim have this.
Nope. And also, there's just a ton of people in Gundam with a custom Zaku too.
Yeah.
Still, they had to make it Char. And, I mean, it's iconic. But so is the Zaku. Like, they're both in this game because the Zaku is iconic.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But they did it in reverse. They're like, well, we have to have the Zaku. It's iconic. And then they're like, we have to have Char's Zaku in it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you couldn't take one of those out? Or, just do something to make it so that the Zaku 2 doesn't completely retrofit the basic Zaku?
I mean, yes, it is technically a different model or whatever, and yes, it is better.
It has a little point on its head.
So there's yet another way in which this game doesn't care about balance right there.
Yeah. Though, like, for all that I'll complain about, like, the way that it makes Denim sad, it does feel very cool and like an important beat for a Gundam game to hit, to press boost as Char Zaku and just go flying into the air. Like, that is very satisfying.
I mean, the Zaku has pretty good rushdown with its, it's got a machine gun, it's got a grenade flurry. It also has a shoulder tackle, and all of these are also faster.
And to keep pace with some of the, like, more over-the-top suits, that's probably what it needs.
Yeah. It feels like actually very good, even balanced rest of the cast, in some ways that even the Gundam isn't.
Yeah, totally. Like, the speed that Char Zaku has is, like, unique, It's really cool.
Yeah, I dig it. Then we move on to the Big Zam,
which we've kind of talked about at length. Yeah, it's hard not to. It takes up a lot of the screen. You know, it demands to be acknowledged.
Mm-hmm. And like we mentioned, it can't turn around. It can damage you by walking into you, and it has a big array of guns on it, so it can either fire a 5-way shot of lasers above it or below it. It can launch homing missiles that will stop once and then rotate towards you and then keep going, so that's the moment where you want to fake them out. It also has its kicks, pretty damaging, though not more so than it walking into you.
Yeah. So the upward firing lasers are really interesting. So when you see this unit that's like twice as tall as you that you have to like boost twice just to get over the top of, it feels like a joke that it has an attack that shoots above it, right? But this is actually a sort of like a Chekhov's gun kind of thing, because the thing about the boost dash, it's vulnerable, right? This firing upwards attack is pretty slow, so getting over the Big Zam is still your best bet. But if they can read you doing it, they can shoot you out of the air, and then you're in the blender again. And that's really fun. That's neat that they can do that.
Yeah, it doesn't turn around, but they thought about the fact that it can't turn around.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Also, it has its mega special where it fires off its big main cannon.
Yep.
It's appropriately pretty disastrous for it to hit you. Even if you're blocking, and if you're not, you're gonna have a bad time.
Right. The other thing about the Big Zam's big main cannon is, you'll have to correct me if you know this is wrong, but I think it might be the only huge laser beam that directly tracks your opponent.
Like all gun attacks in this game have a period where they track, maybe a shot or two will miss, but this is the only special that operates the same way with its tracking.
Yeah, it's the only super beam that does the same thing, because there are lots of other supers that do big beams, but they fire on quite specific trajectories, whereas because the Big Zam is so big, it just points it pretty much straight at you as long as you're in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks, because it's very, very damaging.
Does look pretty cool, though.
It sure does. It's great to do to someone else, but it sucks when it happens to you.
Yeah.
The other thing about it is that, because obviously the first thing that you do after your friend picks Big Zam is that you also pick Big Zam. So one of you will be Big Zam, the other will be a blue Big Zam. And the Big Zam can't block, so there's no reason not to just super right into your opponent's face 3 times. And then the game becomes about, well, I do less damage while my opponent is overheating from my attack, so I need to maximize the damage output of each of my 3 supers, and like, it's very silly. It's so silly, and I'm so glad this game accommodates it. I think that's great.
I don't know if the camera gets ever more zoomed out than when you have 2 bosses fighting against each other.
Yeah. Well, that's it. They don't even really fit on the screen, because like they start stood quite close to each other, so it doesn't zoom out there for some reason. Like, it just, it starts off not that zoomed out, and it's really funny to just see these mechs that don't even really fit on the screen, like squaring up, like looking at each other in the eyes, ready to fire these giant lasers as soon as the announcer says go.
Yeah. Like we mentioned, the second player is blue. You can also pick the alternate color by holding R1 when you select a character, but the blue Big Zams is probably the most different one, because some of them look barely any different in the player 2 color.
Yeah, like, I guess it's easily noticeable with Big Zam, because Big Zam's all one color, right? Like, it's it's one bright color changing to one other bright color, so.
Yeah, but stuff like the Epion, the player 2 color, is slightly more faded purple paint.
Well, yeah, because Epion as well is like busy, as in like not necessarily just the design itself, but the sprite in the game. It's quite busy. Whereas Big Zam is very bold. Like, it's still detailed, but visually it's bold,
Yeah.